What's up, guys? Today I'm following up on yesterday's video, which was a video essentially going through the different regions and picking out some safe to craft cards for commons and epic, or commons and rares only. And that's really just intended to be toward new players who have shard collections that they're not really exactly sure what they want to craft with yet, in case those cards, might get nerfed, or in case those cards really are just not that seen very much in a lot of decks, or just kind of very particular to one archetype and things like that. So I picked cards from every region to just highlight cards that are good in multiple archetypes, multiple decks. So today I'm following that up. I did commons and rares yesterday, so today I'm going to go through and pick a champion or two and then a few epics from each of the different regions that are pretty safe to craft cards. Now, in general, these cards are going to cost a lot more. So epics are going to cost 1,200 shards, and a champion's going to cost 3,000 shards. And the wild cards you should have a lot less of as well. So these, really pay attention to this video. Slow down before you instacraft one, because you're not going to have unlimited resources if you're just starting, even though you have a lot more than, say, other games. You're still not going to have unlimited, so you're going to want to just make sure you're crafting what you want and the archetypes that you really are interested in. So I'm going to go through and pick some that are seen in multiple decks that have a lot of play rate, and I might even highlight some that are really particular and kind of locked to just one deck that I would advise against crafting unless you are 100% for that style of deck. So I'm just going to go through each region. Should be a short video, should be about 10 minutes or so, but I always say that and then we go longer. But yeah, let's dive in. So if you guys are finding it helpful, please leave a like, subscribe, comment, tell me what else you want to see. I also organized all of the playlists now on our channel, so we have full things for deck guides and gameplay videos of certain decks. Then we have a whole playlist for just our podcast episodes, which is the name right here. On top of that, we also have new player guides and some tournament prep playlists as well, so check those out. Let's dive over into the game, though, here. All right, so right now, again, I'm in cards under collection. I kind of go over the basics a little bit each time, just in case we have new players, and that's what we're geared towards. So underneath this filter button, top left, I have just champions and epics highlighted. So we'll go to Bilgewater first. So as you see, it's only going to be about 4 rows of cards, because it's only champions and epics, which are very few. So as far as the champions, right off the bat, really, Fizz, Nautilus, and Tahm Kench are all very particular champions. They all really function in about one deck, maybe two, and that's about it. So I would advise going against Tahm Kench, Nautilus, and Fizz unless they are up your, exactly what you want to play, up your alley. And also, on the flip side of that, all of the other three, MF, Twisted Fate, and Gangplank, can fit in a lot of places. So those three are very safe to craft. MF can be seen in Scouts, which is a super popular deck, but also in a few other burn decks as well. Same with Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate can be seen in some burn decks. He can be seen in decks that are just focused around leveling him up. He's in TF Go Hard right now, which is a really popular deck. So Twisted Fate is a very strong card. And Gangplank in general, he has a lot of decks that are focused on leveling him up as quick as possible, but he's also just a solid 5-drop you can slot in pretty much wherever you want. Going down from there, Sap Sprayfin is a very solid epic card that you could craft. It's a 4 cost. It has elusive, so like flying in Magic, and it also has attune, which refills a spell mana when summoned. But on top of that, you get to tutor or draw a card from your deck that is a spell that costs 3 or less. So you can build toward that by only including one thing that fits that, or you can just use this as alright, it's going to draw any type of damaging spell for me. So Zap Sprayfin is a really solid sneaking damage through card, and also refilling your hand and spell mana as you go. Super safe craft here. Jack the Winner as well, he really only fits into like burn archetypes, but that could be mid-range or aggro burn. And he's extremely, extremely good. He's a 5-drop 5/5 who at the beginning of every turn creates a 0-cost slow spell that deals 2 damage to one of your own units to deal 2 damage to the opposing Nexus. This works extremely well with kegs, which are in all of Bilgewater, because you can deal 3 to the keg and then it'll do 3 to the Nexus as well. Very solid, safe to crafted card right there. On top of that, again, we have all the sea monster stuff like the Slaughter Docks and the Shipwreck Hoarder. That's really if you feel like playing Nautilus. If not, stay away from those. The last one is Riptide Rex here is a safe craft. He's pretty much fitting into most Bilgewater decks, especially mid-range Bilgewater decks. He's an 8 cost. He recently was nerfed. He used to shoot 7 cannon barrages. Now he shoots 6, and he used to have 7 attack. Now he has 6, so he got slightly reduced. But that just shows you how strong he is, and he's still extremely powerful. So as a plunder effect, which is if you've damaged your opponent's Nexus, you get this play effect. He will shoot out 6 cannon barrages, which will deal 2 to units or 1 to the Nexus if the unit isn't there. And he'll target randomly across their whole board. And if they don't have a board, all 6 just go right to the Nexus for 6 damage. So extremely powerful card. Move over to Demacia. All right, so Demacia, we have a lot of different champions. So I would say to stay away from mainly top two are Quinn and Lux, as they are pretty specific. Quinn really only gets to play in scout decks, and even then sometimes she doesn't. And Lux is a specific archetype for like controlling and spell stuff. She hasn't seen a ton of play lately, so I would stay away from those two. Garen you should start with, but he also is pretty particular. The other three, however, Lucian can be seen in a lot of different decks. He can fit into Scouts. He can fit into Shadow Isles, like a killing scheme deck, really strong. Fiora is the same way. Fiora has a lot of different... she has an alternate win con, so when you get 4 kills with her, she wins the game. So there's a lot of decks using Targon or Ionia to protect her and get kills. And then Shyvana is pretty solid now, and she's a dragon, which fits into the dragon deck as well. But there's about 3 different variations of the dragon deck that are very popular and very strong. So I could suggest any of those 3. Top 2 would probably be Lucian and Fiora. As we go down to look at epics here, there's a lot of very particular ones, and I'm just going to highlight 2. I'm going to highlight both their 6-drops because they're both awesome. So Cytherea the Bold, 6-drop. She's an elite. She has an attack ability that gives all your allies +1/+1 and grants them fearsome. So she is the ultimate finisher, really, for these type of decks. She just sends a wide board with her. Everyone else gets fearsome. Hopefully they don't have enough blockers for chumps, and then you get a ton of damage through. She's super solid. The other 6-drop is Genevieve Elmhart. She is a scout, so she fits really well into the scout archetype, but she buffs your whole board on play, and she has challengers, and she has scouts, so you can send her by herself, pull a particular unit that she'll live with, have them kill, and then send your secondary board as they all gets buffed. So both these units, top 2 suggestions. Freljord's different, so definitely Anivia and Braum, both probably stay away from at the beginning just because they are very particular. Braum is a Poro machine who has seen better days. Anivia really only has 1 deck, and it's with Shadow Isles to reanimate her. The others are all good. Trundle and Tryndamere are both used in ramp decks, so if you like ramp, go with those. But Sejuani and Ashe have a little bit more going. Mainly they pair together extremely well, but they also can just focus on a few different strategies where Sejuani can play with Teemo or with Bilgewater to make sure she levels up, which she has the same condition as Gangplank. So she's pretty good. And then Ashe is super solid as well for freezing. And you should get 2 Ashes from the initial deck, which is a really good bonus as well for that 7-day login bonus. Going down to look at some of the epics here. Definitely highlight Avaros and Hearthguard. He's using a few different Freljord decks. He's essentially a 5/5 for 5, which is solid. And when he's summoned, he grants all the allies in your deck +1/+1. So it's again one of the themes of this region where they're just buffing your deck. Super solid. Aurora Borealis is a pretty, like all 4 of these cards right here in this middle row, very specific cards, not going to see a whole lot of play. Fielder Rush is a KDA card, which means it's from a recent event. But it is one I'll highlight, as well as highlighting War Mother's Call. They're both just variations of these decks that use these late game slow spells that essentially just ramp. Your whole goal is to ramp up to this point, and then they just try to win you the game at the end. This card sets 2 different champions in your deck to 10/10 and puts them on the board, which is obnoxious. And then War Mother's Call is a continuous summoning spell that summons a unit every turn from your deck. So when you're buffing your whole deck and you're summoning these units, really solid card. So I'll highlight those 2 if you're into ramp. If you're not, stay away from those. Ionia right now. So I would highlight the Ionia is a very, very interesting region, very weird. Zed can go into a lot of places, so I'll highlight Zed for sure. He can fit into a lot of mid-range rushy decks. He can fit into like a Scouts version deck. He can fit into Lee Zed. He can fit into a lot of different places. Very strong 3-drop that gets 2 bodies when he attacks, that has quick attack. When he levels, it gets pretty obnoxious. So he's solid. Lulu has seen better days. She's very specific to the support archetype. Yasuo is very specific to a stun archetype, even though there's 2 different decks. He hasn't seen a ton of competitive play. Lee Sin's also probably a safer bet, but really, again, he only has 1 competitive deck. Karma is if you like to stall, then she's an interesting option, but again, pretty particular deck. I would say Shen might even be your second most viable option as far as versatility goes. He's using Shen Fiora and Shen Lux, and there's a few other decks that are pretty solid, but he's a good support unit that gives barrier to other allies. So you can use him with, obviously just all of Ionia. You can use him with heavy challenger units with Demacia, and they also add barriers, things like that. Super solid. They have some very awkward epic cards. I will go through and name a couple, though, that I think are very safe. I think Eye of the Dragon's a very safe unit. She's a 2-drop, 1/3 with a tune. And at the beginning of every round, if you cast 2 spells last round, you get to summon a 2/1 ephemeral dragonling that has lifesteal, so it's a really, really strong stall card early. So if you're into any stall deck and you're playing it with Ionia, you probably want to run 2 Eye of the Dragon, which is a very solid card. And then I will highlight the Windfarer Hatchling. This is kind of specific, but it's any deck that you want to run a wide board with. It's an elusive unit and works really well with other elusive units. But when it's summoned, it gives your whole board +2/+2. It has awful stats for itself, but it buffs your entire board. So you have a big board of elusive units. It's super strong. And then another stalling epic card would be Mina Swiftfoot. When you play it, she recalls, which is bring them back to their hand 3 enemies, which is super, super strong. And she recently got buffed, actually. So I will highlight real quick. I'll take a second to stop in this middle point here, but now we've been through 4 regions. Champions, you typically are going to want 3 of each champion. If you're building a deck around a champion, you're going to want to find that champion. But for these epic cards that I'm highlighting, you don't really need 3. So I'm not saying to craft 3 of these. I'm saying these are some of the safer ones that you can craft. But I guess to go back real quick, just in Ionia alone, definitely you're never going to want 3 Mina Swiftfoot. She's a 9-drop, right? So don't worry about crafting multiple, but she's a safe if you want like a 1 option at a high cost card. She's pretty safe. Now, when it comes to the lower cost cards like Eye of the Dragon and Zap Sprayfin from Bilgewater, yeah, you probably want 3 of those at some point. But I just want to highlight that real quick, that I'm not saying craft 3 of all these, because that's a bit obnoxious. All right, so now when we get to Targon, safe crafts for me are Diana and Leona. Diana is a Nightfall unit, and Leona is the Daybreak unit. They both have a lot of versatility. There's a few different decks that they both fit into. Leona, I think, fits into a ton of different decks. Diana fits into about 2 or 3. While the other one, Soraka, really only fits into 1 deck right now that's very competitive. Tarek hasn't really seen a super strong spot, but with Fiora, he's decent. And Aurelion Sol is kind of in the middle a little bit. Like he's a really strong card. He's gotten nerfed before, but he's very particular. Like if you're going to play Aurelion Sol, that's the deck you're playing. You're playing a late game deck. But still solid. As far as Epic goes, definitely highlight the number 1 is the Infinite Mind Splitter. It's an 8-drop dragon, so it fits in the multiple different archetypes, and it's an 8/8. It has Fury like all the dragons do, and when you play it, you pick 2 enemies, and at the beginning of each round, you stun those 2 enemies. So essentially, you can lock 2 of their targets into being stunned every single turn, as long as you can keep the Mind Splitter on board. Quality card. The other one I would highlight is the Mentor of Stones. If you're more into early game kind of rush decks and things like that, this thing is very strong. He grants, which again, grant is permanent, give is temporary or lasts for the round. So his support ability actually grants an ally +2/+2, so it's a really strong effect. And he has a Last Breath. He has obviously weak stats for 3, but he has a Last Breath effect that gives you 3 gems, which are kind of Tarek's like unique mechanic that a lot of his followers have. But they have this interesting burst speed interaction with a heal and add +1 attack to our unit. So just a ton of value in the Mentor of Stones. I would highlight those 2 more than anything else. And there's some other good ones, but those 2 are the ones I'd highlight. For Noxus, Katarina, definitely stay away from, and Vladimir, stay away from, in the sense that they're not bad, they're just very specific. Katarina is probably known to be one of the weaker champions. She can kind of fit in as a slot of 1 of sometimes. Vlad has been worked on a lot and changed, but he still is very specific to what he does. The other 3, however, are very strong. Draven can fit into a lot of decks. He's seen in a lot of rush decks, especially with Piltover and Zaun. When he strikes, he creates an axe, which has the ability to discard other cards. So there's a lot of synergy in Piltover and Zaun that uses axes to discard cards, or uses other cards to discard these freely generated axes. So he can be seen in a lot of decks. Swain can be seen in a lot of decks, both with Bilgewater and with Piltover and Zaun, and with Freljord. There's actually 3 that are really good Swain decks. He's very, very, very strong. Even Shadow Isles, actually, there's a pretty good spider deck with him as well. So Swain, top notch, probably my biggest suggestion. And Darius is pretty straightforward damage dealer. As for epics, Captain Farron, number 1 for sure. Captain Farron, you don't need a lot of him, maybe 1, maybe 2. He's an 8-drop, 8/8. So obviously strong stats. He has Overwhelm, so he's pushing damage through. And when he's summoned, he just creates 3 Decimates in hand. So this card looks bonkers when you just look at him, but really, it's very slow. So you got to play the 8-cost card. Then you get 3 Decimates. You have to wait till next turn to be able to cast it. You can never cast 3 in the same turn unless you have some mana reduction cards, because the most mana you can have is 13 with the 3 additional spell mana. But you slowly can just chip away at the Nexus. So it's kind of like put your opponent really on a clock. Like, all right, you have to win before I cast these 3 Decimates, because that's 12 damage if they don't have healing. So Captain Farron, 100% suggest. And then the last one I would suggest is the Leviathan, especially if you're crafting Swain. This is a must. You might even want 3 of them if you're running Swain, but probably start with 2. 8-drop 5/8 who has Overwhelm. When you play it, you get to draw Swain, so it's a really strong card because it tutors your champion, which is very powerful. And at the beginning of every round, you deal 3 damage individually to your opponent's Nexus, which matters because Swain has a leveled up condition where whenever you deal damage to the Nexus, you get to stun the strongest enemy. So when you have that boat out at the beginning of your turn, you'll deal 3 damage to the Nexus, stun 3 units, and then Swain can open attack and get really, really good value. That's my suggestions for Noxus for sure. For PNZ is really weird. I would say Teemo and Heimerdinger are very specific, so I would stay away from those 2. Vi is pretty solid, but she hasn't seen a lot of play, so your main 2 here are Ezreal and Jinx that you kind of want to play with. Jinx is used in various different aggro-style decks, and she's very, very powerful. While Ezreal can be used in a lot of different decks that have targeting mechanics, including pairing him with Shadow Isles, pairing him with Noxus, pairing him with Bilgewater. There's a lot of different Ezreal decks that are viable, so I would stick with those 2. As for epics, these are some of the weirdest epics around. I would probably point to the Augment Experimenter as one that's pretty solid. So he is a 3/3 for 6, which is obviously terrible. But his effect is you play him, you discard your hand, then you draw 3 cards, and you deal 3 to an enemy. So that's really important because if your hand has no cards in it, then you just get to draw 3 cards at 6, and that's kind of the goal. He also synergizes extremely well with Jinx, but he synergizes with any deck that's kind of just vomiting out all their cards quickly. He refreshes your hand very strongly. And the last one's actually a newer card. It's called the Tri-Beam Improbulator. Really weird card, but it functions really well with a lot of decks that use 3-cost spells, which is mainly Noxus and Piltover, and there's a few different decks that would want to run this, but essentially it builds up as it's in your hand every time you play a 3-cost card, and eventually you get to cast this for 4. It'll deal X damage and summon a random follower that costs X based on how many 3-cost cards you spent. So it's pretty cool, and it starts at 1, so it's really X plus 1, which is really strong. But again, Piltover Zaun's got a lot of weird cards at the bottom and a lot of weird, like really, really weird stuff in here that is kind of funny, but sometimes can work, but would not be my suggestion. For Shadow Isles, Maokai really only fits with, for the most part, Deep, which is with Nautilus, so I would stay away from him. Kalista, Elise, and Thresh, all 3 of these are probably your best bet. They fit into rush decks with both Kalista and Elise. And Thresh fits into some control decks, but also into some mid-range decks where you want to pull out Darius or pull out a Tryndamere, something like that, in the middle of the game and get extra units. So when he has multiple friendly units die, he actually pulls a champion from your deck. So Thresh has a lot of different uses as a 3-cost or as a 3-attack challenger at 5. And Elise and Kalista fit into a bajillion different rush decks. Nocturne's very specific to one deck, Maokai specific to one deck, and Hecarim specific to about 1 or 2 decks. So I'd stay away from those 3 if you're just learning the game now. As for epics, I'm going to really just go down to the bottom here. So these top Undying's very specific. This is specific. Snapvine's kind of a meme. So there's a lot of memes and specific cards. The Terror of the Tides is extremely specific to Deep. Really the only deck who would see it. But I'm going to highlight all 3 of the bottom 9-cost ones. So Commander Ladros, you should get, I think, 1 or 2 of these in your 7-day login bonus, which is that Ash deck. And Commander Ladros, essentially, when you play him, you half the opponent's Nexus. He also has a Last Breath to return him to your hand, and he has Fearsome, 9-cost, 9/6. So he repeats himself, he comes back to your hand, which is super strong, and he halves the opponent's Nexus. You pair that with the card Atrocity, which I mentioned in the previous video. Game-ending combination. Ruination is just consistent 9-cost, kill all units. So you're playing any type of stall deck, you just want to wipe the board. Even if you're just playing a deck that you have a lot of Last Breath effects, you can just wipe the board and trigger all your own effects. Very strong card. It's very, very solid. You probably want 2 of these. Really never need 3 of either of these. And the last one I'll highlight is the Harrowing. This has multiple uses. It has uses in a rush deck where you're just kind of pushing out as much damage as you can, and then turn 6 comes and you have 3 spell mana banked. You play this and you revive your strongest allies that died this game, and you get 1 final big attack either with Overwhelm units or Fearsome units or just too many units, and you try to kill them really early with that. It also has the effect of building up even stronger units and then playing it even later in the game, especially with like an Anivia recombination deck and other things like that, and you just resummon all your things. So it can resummon even champions. So super solid card. So that's actually all the regions right there. And again, let me switch back over here. But that was just really a highlight of different champions and epics that I think are safe to craft that you will use in multiple different decks instead of crafting things that are very specific. So one of the greatest examples of this is the Sea Monsters deck, which is Maokai and Nautilus. It's deep deck. Really, that deck requires about 6 epics and 2 different champions at 3 times each mostly. So you really need a lot to put into it, and you won't use those cards anywhere else. Really. Maybe 1 or 2 of them can find a home in another decks, but realistically, you're going to use them in just that deep deck. So that is if you want to play that deck, that's a big commitment, and if you don't want to play it, it's not worth the resources to even have those cards right away, so stay away from those. And that's just some things to highlight. I don't want you as a new player to come in and say, oh, well, these sea monsters look awesome, maybe I can use them here and I can use them in a bunch of different areas. You might be able to deck build with them better than anyone else had, but realistically, they've been out for a while now, and they've really only ever found one true competitive home, and the other decks are kind of just not as good. So that's the video. I want to, just share what's going on with that. And like I said, I always go longer than I say I'm going to go. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me what you guys want to see next. This will be going into the playlist with new player guides and tips. So hope you find it helpful. Peace.